So my name is Elmarie Swanepoel. I am the project manager for the initiative called Forever Lough Neagh. Forever Lough Neagh is a coalition. It's a coalition of the willing. It's an emerging initiative. We've been together and started coming together for about 18 months now. And it is just exactly as it says on the screen there. It is a multi-sectoral coalition that is represented by a range of organizations that are both accountable for, but also very much invested in the health and the sustainable shared management of Lough Neagh, and of course the wider catchment area. The coalition has been working together now probably for the last 12 months on developing a memorandum of understanding and really thinking about how do we work together in the space that is Lough Neagh, with the history that is Lough Neagh and the opportunities that is held within the restoration of Lough Neagh. And I think everybody has agreed that it will be difficult. There will be challenges in terms of, going from where we are now to kind of where we need to be. But everybody shares that responsibility, and there's a real message of collective responsibility and a real shared understanding that everybody has a role to play in the future. And you will see there that people have agreed and organizations are really bought into this really key message that unless we change how systems function around Lough Neagh, we will never change the outcomes for Lough Neagh. So you can see that one of the key things that the coalition is working on is to develop a longer term vision for Lough Neagh, really focused on what are the drivers of change that we need to unlock to achieve systems change within Lough Neagh. So these are the organizations that's sitting around the table at the moment. So the coalition is kind of spearheaded and brought together by the National Trust. So the National Trust as an organization doesn't have many land holdings within the Lough Neagh catchment. However, based on some of the previous work that the Trust has done within the Mourns and some other larger partnership work that they lead on, they're really well placed to bring people together into this space. So National Trust we would see as the enabler of this first stage of the coalition, and of course myself and the team are contracted through the National Trust, acting on behalf of the wider coalition. So around that table, the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs, the Ulster Farmers Union, the Rivers Trust, RSPB Northern Ireland Water, more locally, the Lough Neagh Partnership, Rural Community Network, Climate Coast Centre, the Woodland Trust and the Lough Neagh Sand Traders. So those are the formal organisations that are currently working together. However, this coalition really recognises that in order to achieve changes at Lough Neagh, anybody and everybody will need to be involved at some stage, but it's felt that the partners sitting around this table at this point in the journey really represents not just the organizations which are sometimes representing some of the areas where the pollution may be coming from, driving some of the changes in Lough Neagh, but also some of the organizations that are working really hard with local community to see what changes we can bring about. So these are not the only people that we work with, and this coalition is very much a flexible coalition as well, recognizing that if we want to achieve longer term change, and you will see the vision statement there on the screen, ensuring that in 30 years, quite potentially longer, Lough Neagh, for it to become a more well-balanced economic, environmental and social heart of a thriving society, for that really longer term period, we have to work really flexibly in terms of understanding where organizations' capacity and value added time could be. So this is a flexible coalition, as I said, and at some point some people will step back and some people will take forward. Some organizations will take lead of different programs as they emerge. So we've, like I've said, been working together for about 18 months. There's now a formal governance structure in place. It's it's really, really well thought through, thinking about actually what sort of governance do we need and what are the key things and key organizational management opportunities that we need to put in place to get people to work together very differently in the space, but to also enable a structure that is flexible enough that will see us over, a very long period of time. So I'm not going to talk you through that governance structure, but essentially what it allows for is a overarching strategic group, Forever Lough Neagh as the coalition. There is a very core management group that will look after the business side of things and make sure that the governance and accountability is really well managed. And then we also envisage that over this longer period of time, we would need to implement some innovation and thought communities. So groups of organizations and people that would really need to kind of take very specific subjects and really explore what they might look like. Excuse me. Within that governance structure, there's also task and finish groups. So those will be groups of people that will go away and work on very specific tasks and, a very fixed period of time projects as well. And then there will be overarching larger programs of work that this coalition will then oversee. And I will talk to you tonight about one of them, which is called the Roadmap to Recovery, which is essentially a strategic framework that this coalition is wanting to put together, or call it, if you like, a strategy for Lough Neagh, thinking about how do we bring together everything that is in the space and identify what the key next steps need to be over that longer period of time. And as you will see on the stage there, everybody in this coalition recognizes that empowering communities, and you'll see it's not engaging communities, it's empowering communities to actually become part of that change that we have to see. And all of this work over 30 years really goes towards thinking about what are the system change outcomes that we will need to achieve to actually see changes in Lough Neagh over a period of time. And you'll see on the screen there, those are our longer term sort of outcomes. These are the key things that we recognize will need to actually change in order for things around Lough Neagh to change. Excuse me. So those are things like engagement, really thinking about climate resilience and the role of that in the future. Thinking about local economies, community wealth building, biodiversity, really big questions, around water quality, policy development, regulation, research and education, civic participation in terms of how do we get people engaged in the space, but also thinking about making peace with nature. There's a real feeling around this coalition that over the last few years, people have spent a lot of time making peace with each other. And there's an opportunity now that we actually really focus on making peace with nature, really understanding the needs of nature and really understanding what we as people can contribute towards helping it heal. And then also thinking about natural and cultural heritage and how we celebrate that and use heritage as an opportunity to kind of bring people together and develop changes. So Forever Lough Neagh is kind of strategically linked through the governance system in Northern Ireland. So the Northern Ireland Executive Programme for Government currently talks about Lough Neagh. There is a commitment about protecting Lough Neagh and the environment. And the Agriculture Minister's Lough Neagh report and action plan has 37 actions. One of those are about creating a longer term vision for Lough Neagh and thinking about what does the partnership approaches need to look like to actually enable change. And that really is where some of these discussions have started around Forever Lough Neagh. So I'm not going to talk to you too much about the crisis at Lough Neagh. I think Constance mentioned there that you've had several talks around the science of blue-green algae. You have listened previously about some of the issues affecting Lough Neagh. So what I would recognize, and what I would like to kind of mention on this only is that it is recognized that Lough Neagh is in crisis. I think people recognize it, nature recognizes it, and the one message that we're desperately trying to get across is that Lough Neagh might be in crisis, but Lough Neagh is not dead, and Lough Neagh is not dying, and there's always an opportunity for us to kind of work together to turn things around. So when we think about the key issues affecting Lough Neagh, and there are 6 things which I've plotted on that slide there, but the reality is we can probably fill a slide, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 10 slides with key issues. But when we're thinking strategically about Lough Neagh and thinking about how will we affect systems changes in the longer term, we have to almost think about how does these issues link strategically, and what are the key things between the issues that we're trying to manage, and how do we need to manage some of the interrelationships between some of the issues when we are planning changes for the future. We know that a huge amount of work has happened at Lough Neagh in the past. It's not for a lack of trying. Lots of people have done hugely valuable and important pieces of work. But in many cases, a lot of the work are focusing on achieving change in the landscape and tackling very specific issues. And what we've found is that there is a lack of coordination between actually kind of linking how some of these solutions maybe interact with things like policy, or how it interacts with sustained management changes, etc. So I think for us, when we're looking at issues in a context of Forever Lough Neagh, it's not focusing on what are the individual issues, but it's thinking about what are the key problems, what are those wicked problems that we just can't seem to unlock, and what do we need to do to make changes in that respect. So Lough Neagh, of course, when we're thinking about Lough Neagh, we can't just think about the loch, we have to think about the catchment. So when we're thinking about our geographical focus area, and it's not lines drawn on a map, this is genuinely recognizing that if we want to change what happens in that blue loch in the middle, we have to think about everything that's flowing into the loch and where it comes from and how people relate to Lough Neagh, in all of those areas, which is yellow, but also the areas which is in green, which is that outflow area, and how they are affected by what is happening within the other areas. So thinking about that then, as that large geographical scale, how do you engage people? How do you change people? How do you empower people to make those necessary changes at that, significant geographical scale? If you look at the yellow areas and the blue areas and the green area on that previous map, you're looking at a lot more than 40% of the land mass of Northern Ireland. That's nearly half the population, and that represents a huge amount of interests, a significant amount of stakeholders. So one of the first pieces of work that we commissioned last year was working with Queen's University, was thinking about how will we affect change at this scale. So they have done a bit of work looking at, what are the key sort of stakeholder groups. And I think at that significant scale, all that we can really look at this stage is who are the key groups that we need to engage with that will have the power and the ability and the influence to oversee changes. What was interesting coming out of that stakeholder analysis, though, was that we need to find a way to really engage children and future generations in the decisions that we take today. And we really have to find a way also to think about how do we reflect the needs of the non-human world in the decisions that we take today, but also in the decisions for the future. So those are some of the sort of larger challenges, I suppose, and more interesting thought processes that we need to adapt when we're thinking about Lough Neagh. So for over the next 2 years, so one of the large programs that the coalition has agreed to work on is called A Roadmap to Recovery. So this roadmap, as I said before, is intended to become a strategic framework for Lough Neagh. It is essentially a strategy. It's essentially a plan, a roadmap, call it what you like. But the intention is that over the next 12 months, we will work with a multidisciplinary consultancy within very many different specialist areas to look at bringing together all the work and all of the learning and everything that's happened at Lough Neagh at the past, really thinking about that, really thinking about how some of those things interact and, you know, what are the key learnings that has emerged from the past? What are the things that was really successful that we need to scale up into the future? What are the things that we need to fundamentally change, you know, when it comes to policy, when it comes to how we engage people, how we engage with nature, etc. And then to develop a plan essentially for the next, you know, 30 years. And of course, no plan will last 30 years, but we will set out a vision for that longer period of time. And then there will be a series of sustained actions that will need to be identified. So we will foresee that in the next year, there will be many hundreds of recommendations coming out of this work, and that will all pull together into this strategic framework or roadmap to recovery. And essentially, after that period of time, we will have it all in one place, recognizing what we need to do, what that should achieve over time if we do it consistently and do it well, what we need to make that happen, i.e. what's the resources that's going to be needed, you know, to deliver significant change, what's the governance models that will need to be developed to oversee that over a longer period of time, and what sort of partnerships do we need to start to form, do we need to kind of think about to take forward some of this work over that longer period of time. And then just important to note, while this strategic piece of work is going to happen over the next 12 months, everything that's happening at Lough Neagh at the minute, all the valuable work that people are doing, you know, active programs, ongoing activities, all of that will continue. The roadmap to recovery is intended to bring it all together into one place. It's not intended to kind of stop anything that's happening at the moment. So the organizations involved in the coalition has started to think about what are the key sort of focus areas, you know, if we want to do a really well put together, coherent and coordinated strategy for Lough Neagh, what are the key areas that we need to kind of focus on? And we've been talking to very many people about what they would see as the key issues, key solutions, you know, key areas that needs to interact better. And these sort of 10 focus areas continuously come up. So we have used that as a starting point for the consultants and said, you know, these are the focus areas that continuously come up in discussions, and what are the, you know, we need to really think about these 10 areas as a starting point, not as an end point, to have conversations with a huge, you know, with a really large group of people and experts, also to understand what are the key recommendations and the key actions that we have to include within the strategy. And very importantly, what the coalition also recognizes that everything that we identify as actions in the future strategy will have to ensure sustainable development at Lough Neagh. It has to consider climate change impacts. It has to also consider whatever actions we decide to agree on and decide to put into the strategy and take forward. Will those actions lead to systems change in the long term? In the long term, or will it just lead to change? Because that's something that we have to really understand at the outset, because it's no point starting on yet another journey of work where we will achieve change, but where we won't achieve systems change. So we will do some systems change modeling as we are working on the development of the strategy. And very importantly, also, it's recognized that for any long-term plan, for any long-term strategy to be effective and to actually sustain, it has to be secured against any financial pressures and changes and issues, and also political changes as well. So that's what we kind of set out to do over the next 12 months in thinking about developing what a future strategy for Lough Neagh will look like. And then a lot of the thinking as well is about how do we empower people, empower organizations, empower institutions to act in a different way, that we can start to kind of shift various systems. So in that space, we really want to develop over the next year a community engagement strategy, thinking about how do we shape some really different thinking around engaging with people, with water, with nature, and with real difficult cultural associations with Lough Neagh. And then we also are very mindful of that there's a lot happening in the Lough Neagh space. And part of the work that we are doing is to kind of bring together and ensuring coherence between some of these things, so that they all can start working together for systems change and not against each other. So as an example, we know that there's conversations happening between the Earl of Shaftesbury and various organisations about potential ownership transfers. There's also a developing citizens' assembly on Lough Neagh. And there's also a resilience program that's being led and being developed by the Lough Neagh Partnership. So part of our role in this system leadership is to think about how does all of these things work together for longer term outcomes rather than working against each other. So finally, I think just to mention that even though this work, it feels like it's very much in the developmental stage, we really have received significant support and really positive feedback on the intended approach. We believe that this initiative and the roadmap to recovery will and should become a critical component to ensure a more holistic and strategic approach is taken to respond to some of the issues that's being faced now and potential different issues that might be faced in the future. And we know that we need really ambitious support for this process from all sectors of society. We need to really start to focus on stopping blaming each other, to actually starting to work together to try and find solutions for the things that will work. And we also know that the importance of multi-party, cross-departmental, cross-political, cross-sectoral and cross-border collaboration cannot be underestimated in terms of Lough Neagh and the changes that we need to see. And we also know that we really have to work differently than what we've done in the past, and that collaboration and different ways of partnership working is really going to make the difference between whether we learn from the past and build on the past, and how we actually learn to work with communities in a different way going forward. We should all be very positive in terms of the actions that are being taken for Lough Neagh. Because one of the things that I see every day in my role is that there are so many people who are genuinely trying to make a difference, and we really have to start to celebrate all of that positive work that has started to happen, and we should really try to galvanize people to also all starting to kind of move in the same direction. And then of course, personally, I genuinely believe that if we really want to make changes at Lough Neagh, and if we are sustained in this process of change over time, then Lough Neagh could really become a blueprint actually for how freshwater systems can be changed over a period of time. And I really very much hope that Forever Lough Neagh kind of sits at the forefront of initiating some of the changes that we all would like to see at Lough Neagh and at other water bodies as well. So that is me, and thank you very much. My contact details are on the screen there, so feel free to get in touch at any point.